Hey there, this is Renessa Boley Layne, and welcome to another conversation on creating your perfect work. If you follow me, then you know it is my life's mission to equip you to discover, design, and get highly paid doing work you love, whether that means radically changing careers, launching a business, or bringing your big idea to life. So today's topic is how every woman can win at negotiating. And here's why we're having this conversation today. So whether you recognize it or not, you are negotiating every single day. Like you are negotiating with your kids, with your spouse, with your customers, with your staff. And if you don't know that you are negotiating every single day, then you will likely find yourself at the losing end of a deal that you didn't even know you were making. And so you might end up feeling overworked, underpaid, undervalued, resentful, or burned out. So regardless of what you think about negotiating, whether you like it, you love it, would rather watch paint dry, if you are at all feeling overworked, underpaid, undervalued, resentful, or burned out, then you need to stick with us to the end of this conversation. And the beautiful woman who is sharing the screen with me is Daniella. Tell me how to pronounce your last name. I meant to ask you.
Kahane.
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 Kahane. Perfect. So Daniella Kahane, she is the Executive Director and CEO of WIN, Women in Negotiation. And part of what I love about this series is that I get to introduce you to organizations that you may or may not have heard of, organizations that if you haven't heard of, you should hear of, because they're opportunities to be able to connect, subscribe, and really be able to catapult your career, your business, and WIN is one of those organizations. It is a mission-driven organization seeking to help women rise professionally and personally through negotiation skills training. And so I'm super excited to dialogue with Daniella on how we can negotiate the best in our work and life moving forward. And so before we get into nitty gritty, let me tell you a little bit about Daniella, because I think her background is going to super surprise you. So Daniella is a Peabody Award-winning filmmaker and content producers for companies such as Chevron, Honda, and HBO. Her films have played at top film festivals, including Sundance, Tribeca, Toronto, Telluride, South by Southwest, and so many others. She's also the recipient of the HBO Young Producers Award and the first runner-up for the prestigious Producers Guild of America Award. And beyond film, Daniella founded an event consulting and planning group called Cincy 6. And it emerged out of a desire to create charity events that targeted a younger generation of givers. And since then, she's produced events that have raised over $1 million for organizations in need. So clearly, this is a woman who contributes to the world in a powerful, powerful, powerful way. But here's what excites me about Daniella and why I was so committed to bringing her into this series and really allowing her to bless you. Because when we think about negotiating, we often think about the mechanics of negotiating, like what do we say, what's the posture, how do we position what we want. But the mission of Daniella and the WIN organization is really to help women find their own voice through negotiating skills. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means, but I just think that it is so powerful, and I'm excited to bring her message into this conversation. And moreover, and I told her before we even started, I just think she's fascinating. I think she's such a fascinating woman. And I got lots of little skills, but I don't think I'm particularly fascinated. And so I'm excited to dig into her past and her journey and allow you to learn from her as you create your perfect work and learn about all of the value that she and her organization can bring to you in supporting you to do just that. So with all of that, Daniella, I want to welcome you to the conversation, and I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's really an honor to be with you, and I'm very flattered by your fascination, and I am excited to share more about what we do and how we help women.
Absolutely. So obviously the interview is all about creating your perfect work. And so I love to, to open up the conversation around that. And when we talk about perfect work, it's not, that everything's honky-dory and that it's not without risk and it's not without challenge. But the idea of perfect work is succeeding in the career business that that you were meant to do and that you were meant to contribute and make a difference in. And so because your background has been so varied, and we'll talk a little bit about that journey, how do you know that what you're doing right now is in line with your perfect work?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question. And I think it automatically makes me think, well, what is your perfect work? And
Yep.
is there such a thing as your perfect work?
Yep.
And I think that for women, sometimes what we struggle with is that perfect? Is that, kind of perfect, that image of perfection.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I will say is that I wouldn't say that we can ever kind of judge by perfect, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
What I would like to sort of frame it as is not necessarily perfect, but more what inspires you and makes you feel like you are lighting up inside.
Yeah.
And if your work brings an element of that to your day, you're in your perfect work, right? And I think you were just sort of alluding to that, but it really is so much about, and I apologize, my kids might be running in and out of the room, about, finding something that enables you to feel like you're bringing your innate talents to this world and sharing that. Excuse me. So anyway, so for me, I think that's what it means in terms of finding your perfect work. It's finding something that you can really bring your innate skill set, and that sort of gives you that sense of I'm contributing in a way that is unique to who I am and serving the world in that way. Yeah. And I think a lot of that also comes to sort of helping women expand their frame of mind, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes we and this is really on topic with negotiation, because you mentioned we negotiate all day with a lot of different types of people. Yeah. I think the first person we negotiate with is with ourselves. Yeah. And in order to sort of even find your perfect work, you have to have those tough conversations with yourself. So yeah, I think it comes that right back to kind of where do we begin this journey?
No, absolutely. And it's so interesting because it is a journey, but on the surface, when we think about your work with WIN, and being in this organization that's really empowering women and with a focus on negotiating, it looks like on the surface it's a complete departure from where you started in the space of film. And so I'm really curious about, if you could briefly share what did that journey look like? Because if we connect the dots, they totally make sense in reverse, right? Yeah. But I'd love, for folks to be able to hear about that, because I think there's some wisdom even in
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I would say it's a long story how I ended up at the helm of WIN. But the through line, when I look back on the various pieces of my career and how they've all built, has been supporting women and being an advocate for women. Yeah. I come from a strong family of women. My mom is one of 5 girls. I have 2 sisters. I have 2 daughters. Wow. And for me, I think a tremendous sense of satisfaction and purpose comes from helping women. I went to an all-women's college, Barnard, and my family is actually the longest line of legacy at the school, which something that I knew as I probably knew from the time I can remember knowing anything. I see myself in a Barnard onesie as a baby. My mom's graduation from Barnard, actually, she was not supposed to be able to attend because it was my due date. I was 2.5 weeks late, so she got to go. But it's always been a strong part of my narrative. And so I think being in an environment where women were so vocally supporting each other and where feminism was not a dirty word, and this is obviously dating back quite a few years before kind of this new acceptance of it, I would say, it's just been a part of who I am to my core. And so in film also, the projects that I tended to gravitate towards were ones that I felt were empowering of women in some shape or form, or helping women, like you said, find their voice. Yeah. And the ones that I was most interested in were the ones that either had strong female protagonists or shed light on something pertaining to how women are in the world. And so I think that they're when I look back, and whether it's female collaborators in film or whether it's women I worked with on Sensi, or whether it's the subject matter of those films, there's always been this sort of I would say, breadcrumb trail that led me to feeling really excited and passionate about doing something so specifically geared around helping women grow and succeed in their, like you said, professional and personal lives, as we do with WIN.
Perfect.
So it's definitely, it's a sidestep in terms of the medium, perhaps, but it's producing and it's supporting of women, and that's the through line.
Perfect. How did the actual, because I want to come back to the through line, because I think the through line is really important, and I want to land that for people. But before that, how did the invitation even happen for you to consider this role?
Oh, okay. So, yeah, that was also unplanned. I think that, a lot of times things happen in the least expected of ways. I was an attendee. I was, the founder of WIN is actually a man. Okay. And I really like to share that with everybody because it's something that we need more of, strong male allies who are doing, more than just speaking about supporting women, but are actually acting in terms of, activating. And so Jack Simone, who's the founder of WIN, saw a need, and that's a whole nother conversation, but basically he's friends with my husband and had let him know about this summit that he was planning. And my husband, knowing my interests, obviously said, "Oh, that sounds like something Danielle would be interested in." And he said, "Well, she should come." So I ended up showing up to the 3rd annual WIN Summit. And I walked in the door and he knew my background as a filmmaker, and introduced myself to him. And within 2 minutes, he said, I'm just meeting you, but I feel like, I know you through your husband. I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you be willing to help me out today? The woman who was supposed to interview the speakers on camera had to bail. She was sick. Would you be willing to do it? And I said, sure. And so unbeknownst to me, I kind of stepped into the inside of this organization in terms of what was so valuable and inherently meaningful about what the work that WIN was doing. And so hearing from these various speakers from across different industries, leaders in their field, academicians who were studying negotiation as it pertains to women, and thought leaders, I was so inspired by the focal point of this, that a few weeks later, when he approached me about getting involved, it was an easy yes.
Wow. There's a couple of things that I really appreciate from what you shared. And I think the first part of that is really understanding our through line. When we're at crossroads and we're trying to figure out what does our next look like, and what is that role or that work or that mission that really lights me up. There can always be this kind of surface of confusion, but if you're able to really negotiate and ask the hard questions of yourself, the honesty will surface. You may not know what to do with that honesty. That's part 2 of it, but it is a part of it is about owning that, right? And so for you, it was understanding that there is this through line of supporting women and enhancing women and helping women to grow that I think is really very, very powerful. And I think for women who are listening, it's trying to figure that out for yourself. Is there a through line? Because there is. Not even is there a through line, it's what's the through line, because it's there for you and the puzzle pieces are there and they point to what is next. And it's rarely ever this radical departure that makes absolutely no sense. Like, it always makes perfect sense if you're willing to dig in and have those questions. And then the second piece of that, it looks like you want to say something to that, so I'm going to let you open up to it.
Yeah, no, I think it's so much about your narrative.
Yeah.
And I think for women, it's understanding what is your narrative and what is the story that you tell about yourself and that you want to tell about yourself, and how is that story working for you? How is that story not working for you?
Yep.
And in the ways in which it's not working, you need to negotiate a new story with yourself. Right? And that story, I think so much of the time, we sort of accept what the world is telling us into our narrative, and it becomes our script.
Yeah.
And more than ever, we're living in such an exciting time, I think, because we are seeing for the first time this blurred kind of, lines of what I can permit myself to do or to believe or to see in myself. And I think, the decision for me, at least, to say, I'm going to take this on was not a rejection of my past or of my, master's in film or of all the work that I've done. It was an embracing of a wider lens story and saying, well, this actually makes a lot of sense from an interest perspective, right? We talk about kind of interests and values and positions in negotiation. It's sort of a very common term. And it gets to the root of that, because it's saying, well, what's behind my position, right? My position is a static, fixed, well, I went to medical school, so I guess I have to be a doctor, right? But if that's not working for you for whatever reason, and you understand sort of, well, what was behind that position? What is the interest behind this? Why did I do this in the first place? And what are my needs? Is it a stable income? Is it to help people? Is it, my passion for science? You can find another script that works better potentially. Right? And so that's what I think when we talk about kind of understanding how the values implicate the positions, how that applies to you in your own negotiation of yourself in terms of your career.
I love how you said it, find another script. And I think there's a permission element to that.
That's my filmmaker voice.
I caught it. I totally caught it, but I love that. And so I'm glad we're recording this, because my laptop is dying. So I'm going to plug it in and then edit this part out. So
yeah, sure.
Am I plugged? Yes, I am plugged. Perfect. I knew I was going to forget to do that too. Okay. We'll just edit that out. That's not a problem. Okay.
Sure.
So I read in an interview that you once gave, Daniella, and in it you said that the root of negotiation speaks directly to our self-worth. And you also said that women carry so much more baggage around negotiating than men. And those comments really, they struck me. So tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, they struck me too. And they're a big reason why I felt like I wanted to say yes to this undertaking in terms of leading WIN. Because for me, it wasn't intuitive that men and women would feel differently around negotiation. I never, and I think this has to do with my upbringing and my mother and, my schooling and everything like that, obviously. But I never looked at negotiation as a something to run away from, because I looked at it as an opportunity to form a connection and a relationship, and yes, hopefully, kind of get what you want, but that was not the end goal in itself all the time. It was really about figuring out a way to connect, and hopefully both parties walk away with a better understanding of what the other party wants, and also a better sense of satisfaction in terms of the relationship. So for me, I think I understood a lot about intuitively about negotiation being communication, all about communication and building relationships. But I think for a lot of women, it's very difficult because it stems from self-worth. And a lot of times we are raised as women to quiet ourselves, to quiet our voices, to say, no, you don't need that, or you don't deserve that, or I'm going to think about the other first, and I'm not going to, address my own needs. And it comes down to that, kind of often used saying of you need to put on your own oxygen mask first, right? We can't take care of those around us. And we have a beautiful urge as women, I think, primarily to be caretakers of others, but we can't do that until we are taking care of ourselves. And so there is a lot of baggage around how we are able to ask for ourselves. There's an interesting statistic that women actually negotiate much better when they're negotiating on behalf of others than when they're negotiating for themselves. And so one kind of trick we offer, or many negotiation trainers sort of advise women is, well, if there's a way to frame a negotiation as a negotiation that you are doing for others, for your company, for your friends, for your colleagues, if there's a way to sort of shift it off of yourself, use that. But that to me is a bit of a crutch,
Yeah.
And so while, yes, you could do that, I'd rather get to the root of that. Well, why do you have difficulty negotiating for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't men have the same baggage around negotiating for themselves as women do? And let's fix the real, underlying issue here, rather than just sort of put a Band-Aid on it by saying, okay, well, I'm negotiating for my friends.
Yeah.
So, in that regard, and there's so many interesting statistics to kind of back this up. There's a crazy one around how qualified a woman has to feel she is to even apply for a job.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it was LinkedIn that put out a study this past year. 60%, if men hit 60% of the qualifications, 6 out of 10, they're good to go. They are submitting their resume. Women, 100%. You need to tick every box perfectly in your mind to even submit the application, right? So what is that discrepancy?
Yeah.
There's a statistic, I think is 16%. Women are 16% less likely to apply for a job than men are when they view it. Or women apply for 20% fewer jobs. Like, there's all these incredible statistics in terms of just even throwing our hat into the ring, which obviously we're not going to succeed at something or win something if we're not in the game.
That's right.
So around the baggage issue, it's sort of let's put ourselves in the game.
Yeah.
The same way men put themselves in the game.
Yeah. And that truly is the first step. And it's interesting because there's this kind of this assumption that there's like one way to negotiate, right? Or there's one style, or there's one way you got to do it. And so you encourage women to identify their personal superpower, which suggests to me that how I might negotiate might look different than how you might negotiate, right? Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that might set a few women free in this conversation.
Yeah, I don't think there's a one size fits all. And I think every situation is so different, obviously, and every person is so different. And I think success comes from authenticity and from embodying and being yourself, as opposed to trying to, take on somebody else's style and hone that. Mm-hmm. So I definitely encourage women to understand sort of, well, what makes them feel confident? There's this idea that, negotiation is just a very specific conversation that you need to have, that you need to follow certain kind of guidelines in, that happens once in a blue moon, right? Like around salary or around my performance review, or, twice a year. Yeah. But if we can see it differently, and we can see it as a conversation we have multiple times a day, all day, in terms of, like you said, anytime you're, kind of speaking with your spouse about something that you care about, or your children about, something that you're needing from them, or about with your colleagues, or that's a negotiation, then we have so much opportunity to work on that skill. Mm-hmm. So that's number one in terms of sort of reframing negotiation. And then when it comes to sort of linking it to as something that you feel confident about, right? So women tend to be, let's say, as an example, very good communicators, right? They're oftentimes really good at building relationships, at fostering harmony, or at, kind of cooperation between people. If we can say, well, actually that's negotiation, which it is, then you can sort of maybe take some of the stigma around negotiation that you feel uncomfortable with, basically, this is mine, or I want this, or I deserve this, or all those things that are barriers to women in negotiation. And you can link negotiation with something you actually feel really good about, whether that is building a relationship, or whether that's empathy or emotional intelligence, or all these other skills that feed into, negotiation. And so I really like the idea of helping women see negotiation in a broader lens. And so one of the first things I say, and I know we spoke about this in the past, in terms of what is my job at WIN, it's to help women reframe negotiation for themselves so that they can perhaps engage in a new attitude towards it.
Got it. So kind of thinking about this, or parking on this superpower issue, or this idea of having a personal superpower, because I want to make sure I get it and I understand it. That the listeners are as well. So let's say that you're someone who is very empathetic, or that you have a high level of emotional intelligence and you can really kind of understand that in other people and draw that out and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
How can you leverage that? Because on the surface, again, when we think of the stereotype of what negotiation is, the art of the deal kind of thing, that those two qualities don't tend to belong together, right? And so if someone is like that, and not every woman is that way, but we're just using it as an example that people can begin to attach to, how do you take something that is your strength and weave it into negotiation so that then you're negotiating from an authentic place? Like drive the point home so that we can understand it, and then people can apply whatever their quality happens to be.
So first of all, it's about the attitude you bring to it, right? So if you are scared of negotiation or you don't like negotiation, by the way, when I start a session or a workshop, or the first thing I want to know from the woman in the room is, how do you feel about negotiation? And invariably and upsettingly, the answer is, I don't feel good about it. I don't like it. I don't want to do it. And that's why we exist. I mean, I wish it were different, and I hope we are making strides in reframing it for women. But that's exactly what I'm talking about to begin with, in terms of, right, if there's something you know you don't like to do, you are going to avoid it. You're not going to prepare for it as much. You're not going to want to do it as much. You're going to avoid that, right? Because we as humans have the tendency to avoid what causes us pain or discomfort or fear. Yeah. So I think the first step is sort of saying, well, how can I see negotiation differently? So when I say link it to a superpower, that's the reason, right? If I feel, well, I don't like negotiation, I don't want to do that, but I know I'm really strong with empathy, or I really love, kind of understanding people and bringing my emotional intelligence to a room. Okay. Well, I actually can join those things, because so much about negotiation is fostering sort of understanding other people's wants and interests, right? Yeah. Is about empathy, is about connecting and active listening. And so if I can kind of rebrand what it is, this conversation that I need to have with that superpower, I'm going to start to feel differently about having that conversation. And that's going to open up doors for me in terms of practicing it more, exposing myself to it more, getting better at it. Yeah. So it's a way to sort of embrace a growth mindset around the skill, which I'm advocating for. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes total sense. And so, I've heard you say that negotiating is about opening women up to what's possible. Like, what's possible in your career, what's possible in your business, what's possible in your life, what's possible in your marriage, whatever. So for women and men who might be listening in as well, that have daughters in particular, because I have a daughter, why is negotiating in particular such a critical skill for us to master?
Yeah. Well, it's that saying, we can't be what we can't see type of thing, right? And so for ourselves, if we don't see the options, if we don't see the possibilities, if we don't see ourselves with a growth mindset, we're not going to be able to get there. And so I think, as somebody who is, like I said, 2 daughters myself also, and wanting them to grow up without sort of the external kind of traps that society puts on us, so much of that is being able to see for yourself kind of how to expand the frame for yourself around this, and how to embrace negotiation, irregardless of what society says. And so that is so important, whether you're, the father of a daughter or the mother of a daughter. But I think that, because we have this baggage, and I do believe it's changing. I think that, in general, we're raising our children differently than we were raised, and people are waking up to the importance of it. But I can say it personally as a parent, something that I think about often in terms of how do I send my daughters this message, because kids are born with the intuition, I think, to ask. My kids aren't afraid of the no. There's no fear. They will ask and ask and ask and ask again. And somehow, as we go through life and puberty, and we hit an age as girls where said, oh no, I don't want to ask. And I'm scared of, what he's going to say or what she's going to think or how they're going to perceive me. And all of a sudden we clamp ourselves down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we put those brakes on.
Yeah.
And they stay with us for a very long time, and they're very hard to undo. And so, as the parent of now 4-year-olds and 6-year-old, and seeing that they don't have those brakes on yet, and I hope they don't develop them to the extent that I think, a lot of people are prone to do and is normal and natural. I ask myself these questions a lot. Well, how do I encourage this? Even if I'm saying no, how do I kind of give them this messaging that the ask is so important and so good, and to keep asking,
Yep. Yeah. I think, I think it's beautiful. B, but I also think it's the cornerstone of how we begin to advocate for ourselves and what we need, and how we're able to create boundaries and how we're able to get support. All of it starts with the ask. And the negotiation goes from there, but just being willing to put the ask out there and not being afraid of the no, because the no is not really
exactly.
Sometimes the no is just direction, right? It's not a stop sign to the dream. It's just the direction on how you're going to get there, or who's going to support you, or who's going to come on board. So let's migrate into talking practically speaking, because I know that there are folks who are itching to figure out, okay, so what does that mean? What am I supposed to do? What do I actually say? Right? So if you had to kind of boil down your negotiation process, and obviously it's not that simple, but if you had to boil it down to kind of 3 to 5 like key steps, like what would be the framework that you would walk women through to be like, here's how you begin to break down your negotiation process?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think like it kind of starts with the self-talk, right? What I spoke about first in terms of your own narrative. Kind of first addressing, well, what is the voice inside my own head? Because that implicates your ask, right? Like believing that you deserve something is at the root of asking for it. So first, I think we have to kind of turn to ourselves and say, well, what is that inner voice saying? And do I validate myself for that? Am I kind to myself? Am I shutting myself down before I even get out the starting gate? Am I in a growth mindset? All those questions of really kind of understanding, looking into the self and developing more self-awareness around the voice inside of you is, for me, I would say the first step. In terms of effective negotiation. You can't negotiate and advocate for yourself with others until you do it for yourself with you.
Absolutely.
Step 1.
I agree. Step 1.
Step 2, I would say, is kind of identifying what you want, right? So what are your interests? What are the things that are driving your position? So get behind the position too. What is important to you in life, right? So like, it's very big, but again, sort of knowing that instead of letting somebody else put that on you, like, oh, I've always been this way, and so I have to, want this. No. What is going to make you happy? What's going to derive meaning for you? What's working for you and what's not? So that's number 2.
And I think that's it seems simple, but it's not. Like, there are so many layers of confusion that can go on for people. With regard to what do you want? And I'll often ask clients that question, because I'm a firm believer. So I have a lot of conviction on this point. I'm glad you said it, but I'm a firm believer. You design with the end in mind. Like, what's your end game here? Like, going into this conversation or whatever, what is it that you really want? And it's surprising how often people don't know. It's kind of like, well, I just don't like, whether it's a conversation with a boss or a conversation with whomever, you just don't like the current situation, but you haven't necessarily thought about, well, what's the end game for you? Because we've got to come to a solution. and so getting really clear about what that is, and then giving yourself permission for what you really want, not what you think you can get, not what you think you deserve, not what you think they'll allow, but what do you really want? And oftentimes what we want is always outside of the comfort zone of what we think we'll be able to get, which is usually an indication that you're spot on. If you're just outside the comfort zone, you're probably spot on. But I think it's such an important point, because oftentimes I haven't taken the time to really think about it, or we haven't had the courage to be honest about it. And then sometimes we end up winning the negotiation, quote unquote, but then we get what we don't want because that's what we
Yep.
for, was the thing we actually really
That's
wanted.
what we've, exactly. And then you wonder at the end, you're like, well, why am I not happy? Or, you know, why am I feeling bad about this? I just got what I wanted. Well, exactly. Maybe it wasn't really what you wanted.
Exactly.
So doing that homework, I think it's hard, and it takes work, but it's so important in terms of the process.
Yeah.
So that's number 2. And I think that sort of then segues into number 3, which is understanding where you can be flexible and where you need to be firm, right? Because every conversation is going to require some give and take. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, like I said, it's so much about relationship building. Mm-hmm. And in relationship building, it's so important to be able to hear the other side, mm-hmm. and to be able to give back. And mm-hmm. so it's sort of, well, you know what? I think I'm really stuck here, but where are all the areas that there's flexibility? Because that's going to be currency for you to use in a negotiation. So coming prepared with that is really critical. Mm-hmm. You know, knowing where you can, where you need to dig your heels in and where you can be really flexible. That would be step 3. Okay. And then step 4 is about understanding the other. It's kind of that empathy, perspective taking, right? So now that I've done 1, 2, and 3, let's say, and I really have a lot of insight into myself and how I feel about this and what I'm looking for and what I need and what I want and etc. Well, now let me shift set. Yeah. Who's this person I'm having a conversation with? Mm-hmm. And what is their perspective? Yeah. Right? Like, what do they need out of this conversation? What are their values that are driving their positions around this? Because the more you gather data around that, the better prepared you're going to be when walking into the situation. And that's going to be amazing for you in terms of anticipating, right? So I think that it's also going to be helpful in terms of giving your negotiating partner or your counterparty the sense that you're actually there to have a dialogue, as opposed to, you know, I'm here to make these demands and I need my demands met, which is going to be so much more positive for you in the end game.
I agree. I think what's critical about it is that, because our title here was how every woman can win at negotiating. But the reality is, for me to win doesn't necessarily mean that you have to lose, right? And if I understand what a win is for you, and if I put the thought into that, and again, this can be as simple as in, especially in relationships that you have, whether it's in a marriage or, you know, whatever with kids, like, what's the win for this? What's the win for my spouse? Because I can't get it all and then be like, dun, da, 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 right? Because if that person doesn't feel good about the deal, then somehow this is going to fall apart, right? And it's same in your job, or same with your customers, or what have you. And so being able to understand what's important to the other person, and even being able to verbalize that or connect with them in that way, it just creates we're in this together, right? As opposed to one is going to be the victor and one is going to be the sucker, because nobody wants to be the victor in the conversation. So I think that's really important. And going back to your step 3 about knowing where am I flexible, because sometimes we'll go into these conversations and we think we have to hit like, I need all of this, when in actuality, I might not need all of this. And if I'm willing to give it something or I need to know that going in. Otherwise, in the drama of the conversation or in the emotional intensity of the conversation, we can show up so rigid that, again, it doesn't feel like it's, you know, 2 parties coming together to create, you know, to connect and create something that's really powerful. And the reframe that you gave at the early part of the conversation, if I'm going in with that perspective, then it's just a very different way of interacting than if I'm going in with my checklist of demands and I've got to be the victor with all the spoils at the end, right? So
exactly. And yes, absolutely. This connects right to sort of the theory that a negotiation between distributive negotiation and integrative negotiation, and value claiming versus value creating. And in every negotiation, it's sort of finding that balancing act between, you know, showing up and claiming value versus creating value. And I think, you know, it gets the root of that. And the point being that most of the time, like almost all of the time when you're negotiating, it behooves us to take a long-term view, because it's not the type of thing that we're just going to have, a single conversation, never see this person again. It's usually people that we interact with in a consistent way, that we want to come back to the table with, that we want to be able to meet again, that we want them to walk out of the room and feel good too, right? Yeah. And so it's definitely an important piece to consider. And I think part of that, so that segues into sort of prepare, right? How do you prepare for a negotiation? And in my mind, there's kind of two ways. Mm-hmm. One is the content preparation, in terms of like what we've been saying, in terms of, what are my needs? What are this person's needs? Doing the research, understanding sort of, what are the market norms? If you're, let's say, going in for an interview, what is the competitive market? What, pay transparency, things like that. But then there's also the preparation that needs to be done in terms of, well, how can I bring my best self into this room? And how can I make for sort of the most likely positive conversation in terms of how I'm showing up? And so there's a whole nother piece of it, which I like to call holistic negotiation, which we do training in as well, in terms of, well, how are you showing up to this room, and how can you bring your best self to the conversation beyond what is the actual content of the conversation? Having to do with more the nonverbal cues that you're giving off, whether that has to do, with your posture, whether it has to do with your voice, whether it has to do with, eye contact, and all the 93% of communication that happens nonverbally. So that's, I would say, the next step in terms of preparing for that. Do what you can. There are things in your toolbox that you can develop to bring your best self to the negotiation, beyond the content, beyond the research, in terms of kind of the what, because it's so easy to get thrown emotionally when you're having a difficult conversation, and oftentimes negotiations can be difficult, into a place where you're not in your best self, where you're not even able to retain, well, why did I say it? Why, what was my rationale for this? Or, so getting back to sort of the core kind of place of calm, of I'm in control of, kind of wise mind, so to speak, as opposed to emotional, kind of angry mind, or whatever you want to call it, heated, is definitely a piece of it as well, in terms of preparation. And that's something that we like to talk about also.
I think it's such an important point, because in the process of negotiating, we can take the dialogue so personally, like how the other person responds, or whether they agree with us, or whether they see it the way that we see it. And once we get to taking things personally, that's where the emotion, takes over. And somehow we end up like blowing the whole thing to bits, because it's become so personal, where I can't understand the other person's point of view. I can't understand what's really valuable to him or her. Even if it's not valuable to me, it's valuable to them. And it's as valuable to them as the thing that I want is to me. And if I can honor and respect that, and take some of the personal stuff off the table, then I can begin to play the game and make it, and be so much more nimble about, and flexible about what the solutions happen to be. So to your point about creating value, I think that's a really kind of interesting reframe, because I don't know if I go into negotiations thinking, oh, I'm going to create value for you too. But if I can go in, then I can be so much more confident, because then I don't have to, it's not about me. It's not about, well, did he or she agree with me, and did I get what I, it's about, how can we be flexible about this? How can I make sure he or she walks away feeling awesome, and I get what I need as well. But there is an elevation that has to happen, almost a detachment to it, in order to be able to do that. But you can't do that until you've dealt with your ego trips, and you've dealt with your baggage, and you've dealt with your insecurities, and you've dealt with all the triggers, and all of those kinds of things as well. And so I think it's a really, really powerful point. I want to ask you this though, and this is more kind of into the tactics, because you talk about preparing, and in the most common negotiation is around like salary and stuff like that. how should women go about really understanding the market and figuring out their worth? Because oftentimes they're going into a conversation, they get an offer, they don't know, like, it sounds good, looks good, maybe it's more than they've made in another role, but not necessarily totally what they're worth, right? And while this isn't a career development conversation, I'm really curious from a negotiation standpoint, how do you advise your members and your clients and all of that to figure that stuff out and get behind the scenes to start to understand more about what they're really worth and what they can really command, if that's not information that's readily available to them?
Yeah, it's asking the questions that you often want to shy away from, right? I think that this is a conversation that women and men probably are somewhat see as like kind of taboo, or maybe not the most. Maybe it's intrusive to ask your friends what they're, making for, if they're in a similar role or whatever. But I think that if you're able to frame it as, well, no, I'm trying to make a difference in terms of pay equity for myself and for women everywhere, and this information is going to help me get there and going to help other women get there, you can give yourself the license to ask those questions. And I think more and more women are embracing that, but it's definitely difficult. And so, the first step is kind of going there with yourself, right? It's the negotiate with the self to ask the question in the first place and say, this makes me uncomfortable, but I think it's important that I know this, or I ask this. And so having those conversations with your friends, with your colleagues, with your mentors, with your allies, critical beforehand. And that's not stuff you can kind of cram in. You need to do the work before you show up in the interview, before you show up to the negotiation. There's also a lot of forums. Like I know, for instance, I just saw, and I was so happy to see it, I'm on a mom forum where somebody put together a spreadsheet for women in tech that just culled together all these women's, self-volunteered information around their salary and their position. And it was such a useful tool, and it just grew exponentially, like overnight. It was amazing to see, like 100 women saying, this is my role, this is my position, and this is how much I'm making, because it gives so much data to women, and that's power. So whether you're part of mom groups, or whether you're part of other women's groups, there's ways in which you can tap into the power of that community to help women kind of, with this type of transparency that needs to happen. There's definitely a lot of partner organizations, affiliate organizations that are doing work in this space that want to help women with this, so I would say that they exist, but it requires work on your end in terms of there's no quick and easy database where you can just Google, what's beyond obviously what everyone knows about. But when it comes to actually getting like the specifics around your organization, but I would say, Fairy Godboss, and her site, things like that are important and great organizations as starting points to have these conversations, and then have them with your community and with the women around you.
Yep, absolutely. I'm glad I asked the question. I'm glad you answered it, because at the heart of it is us being willing to have the difficult conversations about transparency and being willing to do that. And so if you're listening, there is no easy way to, it's not just payscale.com. Like, you really got to go. But in doing so, you will be armed with information that is critical to you being able to get what you're worth and negotiating what you're worth. And so as we begin to close out, I'd love, Daniella, just to share a little bit about WIN, about, why this organization is so special and why women should pay attention, to what you're offering. And then as well, Daniella has a free gift that she's offering everyone to take, full advantage of, if it makes sense for you. And we've got a link to that free gift right here at the bottom of the interview series. So click it, put your name, your email, take full advantage, get on their mailing list, follow their stuff, because at some point in time, you are going to need to negotiate something big and really important, and you want to be equipped with those skills now. So Daniella, just take it away with us, and then we'll wrap it up.
Great. Yeah, so Win actually started as a conference only business. The idea was really to bring strong women's voices to the front of the room around helping inspire other women to negotiate more. We've grown from there, and I'm really proud to say that, because I don't believe that any skill is taught overnight or that it's acquired in one day. I think that every skill requires constant practice. Like, no muscle is developed one trip to the gym. So what we're doing now is we're offering year-round training in addition to our summit, our summit is amazing, and it's a great opportunity to meet women from, across different industries and connect and attend workshops that are skill building, as well as hear from industry leaders across different sectors. But beyond the summit, which happens annually, we, and it's obviously tricky now with COVID-19, we have our year-round training through workshops that we run, webinars that we run, and coaching. And, for a more handheld approach. And we do offer individual coaching as well as group coaching. Which is wonderful, and everything is done virtually right now. So it's definitely accessible to women, regardless of COVID or geographical concerns, etc. And really the point is to help women feel differently around this skill, to help them become, like we said, better advocates of themselves, and to rise professionally and personally. So that's a little bit about what WIN does, and you can visit our website winsummit.com to learn kind of more about the details of those workshops. We offer workshops both to the individual, to attend as an individual, and also to companies where we offer like a white glove service where we can really curtail a particular workshop in a 2-hour, a half day, or a full day session to do this training that is like really specifically catered to the company and what the women are going through. And until women feel the same about negotiation as men, I believe we need to exist.
Yeah.
I think there's a real cause and a case for gender-based negotiation, to doing it in an environment which is sensitive to how closely it cuts to self-worth and value.
Absolutely. And I echo everything that you said. I think it's so incredibly important. I'm glad that you were able to be here and share this with us. And once again, guys, if you take a look down at the bottom of this video, you'll be able to see a link to Daniella and WIN's website. I believe you're giving, is it free 20-minute consultations?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're offering free 20-minute consultations with one of our WIN coaches. We have a cadre of amazing expert master's level and greater coaches and trainers who we match for coaching, and like I said, we offer group and individual as well. And so if you're not sure it's right for you, you're not sure what your goals are, you're not sure what you want to get out of it, we offer these 20-minute calls so that you can get a better sense of this is what we can work towards and this is how we can help. And specifically, if you have an upcoming negotiation that you want to prepare for, it's really helpful. And so we're offering those, and hopefully it's the beginning of a relationship.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you, and on behalf of Daniella and myself, for everyone that's listening, we want to wish you the absolute best. Much success and happiness in your career, your business, as you move forward to create work that you love and get highly paid doing work you love. Certainly let WIN be a part of your winning team as you think about doing that. So we will see you on the other side, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having me today. And thank you for the work you're doing to support women. It's really amazing.
Absolutely. Thank you. We'll see you guys. Bye-bye.